Alright, so as you saw from the title, I think Anbernic has a strategy to stay on top, and that strategy is working. So you might think it's because of their high power products, but Anbernic doesn't make any higher power products than companies like Retroid and definitely AIN and ANEO. Well, they must have like competitively priced products, right? Well, kind of. They do have some competitively priced products, but Retroid is also king there, with the Retroid Pocket 2S that is somehow only $90, technically. But you don't need power, right? Maybe it's about like their controls or like their screen or something, some other spec. Well, they have a great screen on the RG5i6, they have a great control scheme on the RG Arc, but they're not really combined. So what are they doing right? So while Anbernic is good at taking bits of what I mentioned earlier, their strategy seems to be nostalgia, not only through emulation, but by looks. So they made a few handhelds that have done very well that don't really incorporate what I said before. So the ones are the RG Arc that I mentioned earlier, that mimics the Genesis, the RG353P and PS to mimic the SNES, their RG300X made to resemble a Game Boy Micro, and their newest product, the RG35XX SP, made to mimic the Game Boy Advance SP. So while this is a very blanket statement, most vertical handhelds are also based off of the Game Boy lineup, and that's another thing that they use, that they mimic. So I don't really have much data on the 300X because I wasn't in the community at this time, and sales data is not really a popular thing that is just like sent around. But I know that the rest of them got like great feedback by the community, and like they're priced great, and I think they sold a lot of them. So if you've been in the RH Discord, you have probably seen me. I am kind of there a lot. I am not proud of this, but I'm there a lot. So I've seen a lot of stuff there. And one of the main things that I've seen is people going like, oh, I had a Genesis as a kid. Oh, this device would be awesome. And it's like, the RG Arc. My dad walked into my room as I was watching the Retro Game Core review of the Arc. And he had a Genesis when he was a kid, but he's like never liked any retro things now. And he doesn't like me using retro handhelds. And he saw that and he's like, oh, that's a cool device. And it's just all about that nostalgia, that visual nostalgia. For the RG35XX SP, it's a very similar story. More people saying, oh, I had a Game Boy Advance SP as a kid. This looks just like it. And one verbatim from this guy named Pixels in the Discord was, wait, OMG, this clamshell design is like the old Game Boy I had when I was a child. So everyone with these handhelds or like consoles before love these new ones and want to get these like specific handhelds because it's physically nostalgic to them. So here's how most people find retro handhelds. Most people either find retro handhelds through Anbernic because of all of their like new consoles, their sales, and of course these handhelds, and then like Retro Game Core because he's the guy on YouTube. He's the guy pushing everything, and when you see retro handhelds, like he's the main guy on YouTube. So the idea is you either go through one of them, but then afterwards you start to do more research and you see that, oh, there's so many different handhelds that play all of my childhood games. And to someone like me, I go, oh, performance, ergonomics, I want battery life, that's pretty much it. I just want raw power to the dollar. And the idea is that's mainly just me. Other people will think about those same things, but they'll also take into account, hey, this console looks exactly like, one of my older consoles. Oh, that's something that I like. But as a kid, I've never really had an interaction with a console that's, being produced like this. Yeah, so I've only seen one company, like, attempt this, and yeah, one popular company attempt this, and that is ANEO. ANEO has been working on their retro collection devices, and these devices look like retro things, but the only problem is they're overpriced, and they don't really look that old. They just look wonky, in my opinion, which is fine, but it's not as nostalgic. Alright, but nostalgia can't really be a backbone of, like, their whole company. So there must be another section of this, and that is price. So if they for some reason released the same consoles, so like the RG35XX SP, the RG Arc, if they released those and put them at the same went from $60 to $70 and put it at like $100, nobody would buy it. Because, even though it's nostalgic, it can only do like PSP, N64, Dreamcast, and not even the whole library. But, you can get the Retro Pocket 2S, and it can do like the whole library of those games for the most part. And some of GameCube, PS2, and even Wii. So, like, why would we get that? Then it would seem dumb to, like, get it. And Anbernic knows this. That's why they have it set so that it's not at that price. So they are making a very low margin on this. And developing something like a hinge is not an easy thing to do. Take Retroid, for example. The Retroid Pocket Flip is a prime example of this, as the hinge just broke on like pretty much all of the handhelds. Retroid isn't a cheap company, and the handhelds that they make aren't cheap. So Anbernic can somehow afford to like sell this RG35XX SP with so many moving parts for such a low price, and then they can sell this completely re-engineered D-pad and like form factor for the RG Arc at such a low price too, because it's not how they make money. So before I go through how Anbernic makes money, let's quickly explain Nintendo's like trick. So Nintendo makes these low power devices, but you probably first got into it because it's popular or cheap. So Nintendo will sell their consoles for cheap, and then they'll make money from their games like Mario and Zelda. Now that you bought Mario and Zelda, you played them, you enjoyed them, maybe you played them a few times. When the next line of consoles comes out, you'll be more familiar with those specifically. And then, you'll have to decide, do I want an Xbox, do I want a PlayStation, or do I want a Nintendo? Then you'll think, well, I had a good experience with Mario and Zelda, I had a good experience with Nintendo, I haven't experienced Xbox and PlayStation. Let me instead get, the new Nintendo console. And that's how it works. So other companies like Xbox and PlayStation do have this, but the thing is they don't really have as many unique games for their system. Alright, so Anbernic employs a very similar strategy. First, you come because of these cheap nostalgic handhelds. Then, when you want to move like more, you want to get more power, let's say you want to play some GameCube, then you'll go for the RG405 series, and those handhelds will make them a bit more money. The 405V is slightly cheaper, and they'll probably make less of a margin, but the 405M they can market as like a premium device, which it definitely is, and then basically just sell it for quite a bit, and they'll make much more of a margin from that. They'll also be able to make margins from things like their higher end consoles, their accessories, their like bags and whatnot. So because of that, you're basically just stuck in the Anbernic thing. Most people will think, I've used Anbernic before, I know they're good, so I'm gonna just stick with Anbernic and keep going with them because I trust them. They didn't like steal my credit card information, and I don't want to risk it with another company. For me, I don't really care. I'm like, whatever, I'll just go to this other company. But it's that's one of the main reasons why people will stay with Anbernic. So it isn't only Anbernic that does this, but the ideas mix very well between their price and their nostalgia. So, for example, Retroid makes the Retroid Pocket 2S, which I talked about earlier, which is somehow at like $90. Technically, again, you're gonna probably want to spend $100 to get the higher end model. You gotta pay for shipping, so because of shipping, you're gonna pay like $15 or something like that. But you can get it technically as low as $90. So it's apparently sold at like either a loss. Well, okay, so it's very close to middle. They're either breaking even, so they're selling it at a loss, or they're barely making money. But the idea is they'll make more money from things like the Retro Pocket 4 and 4 Pro. They might make some money from the DIY kits, and that's just how it works. And again, ANEO tries to sell their handhelds and, computers that look nostalgic, but they don't have as much of a competitive price. So it's not as good. So Anbernic meshes those two ideas together and basically creates something that makes them king. So earlier, I didn't explain this, but I think that this doesn't affect me at all, and that's because I have pretty much no connection to retro things. I have a connection with two consoles, but one of them much more than the other. So I have owned an N64, and I have owned the Game Boy Advance line. So the Game Boy Advance, the Game Boy Advance SP, the Game Boy Advance SP backlight. But all my Game Boys I sold right away. I got an N64. It's my dad's N64. I used it, and I kind of remembered, hey, it's my dad's, and it's something that's kind of nostalgic to me, kind of through my dad. I did end up selling that thing, but I got to have a connection with that, and that's what makes me wanna, I like to play Nintendo 64 games. I like things with the Nintendo 64 control scheme. So that's the only thing that will really get me in this, with this like trick. Yeah. So unless an N64 handheld comes out, this is not really what I care about. I more lean towards, hey, are the specs good for the price? Like for the 35XX Plus series, I care about the two devices that look like the least nostalgic, the RG28XX and the RG35XXH, just because of their versatility. The 28XX is small and pocketable, you can just shove it in your pocket. The 35XXH is big and clunky, but it has like two joysticks, it has Wi-Fi, it has Bluetooth, it has that HDMI out. And yeah. So if you're a long-time viewer, you might remember this video called Anbernic is gonna... something like that. Was this clickbait? Yes. But I think I had a great point. And the idea was other companies like Retroid were catching up at that time, and other companies like Mew I thought would catch up. Mew is now left in the dust. I'll explain that in another video. But Retroid and Powkiddy are gonna be able to like race them to the top. But the thing is, people go for Anbernic because of this look. They could easily go for like an RGB 20, an RGB 20SX, an RGB 30, like an RGB 10 Max 3. These things have better chips. They're better price to performance. Sometimes, not always. Anbernic is doing a great job of pricing right now. But people will go for these handhelds because they look like what they had as a kid. And that's what keeps them apart from competitors. So, again, as I said, Retroid has very similar offerings that I think are better in a lot of price categories. But Anbernic dominates the niche of a very specific niche. Cheap retro handhelds that look like other first-party retro handhelds. This is why Anbernic is king.